In 1854, the British military achieved something almost unbelievable at the Battle of the Alma. A single man bypassed an entire enemy army and captured the center of their position, completely alone. This was the Crimean War. The man leading the British Expeditionary Force was Lord Raglan, who was 67 years old. Raglan was an amiable and deeply loved gentleman, but historical records tell us he was entirely too gentle and subject to absent-minded fits. He was unsuited for the physical and mental demands of a modern campaign. The disciplined ranks he commanded faced the grim, heavily armed reality of 19th century warfare, an environment where survival depended on absolute focus and strict order. Battles in this era were typically decided by ruthless tactical precision. Having a frail, absent-minded commander wandering a battlefield was a dangerous anomaly. The British military had a systemic weakness. It appeared they had selected their senior commanders by recruiting straight from an old people's home. Raglan was a relic of a bygone era. Decades earlier, he had served as secretary to the Duke of Wellington during the Napoleonic Wars, and he was a veteran of Waterloo. His mind remained firmly stuck in those past glories. This created a complete cognitive disconnect regarding the actual war he was fighting. Remembering his youthful service, Raglan constantly referred to his current Russian enemies as the French. In reality, the French were now his allies. Placing a commander living in the past in charge of the present meant the British chain of command was disconnected from the reality of the field before a single shot was even fired. This map shows the massive scale of armies colliding at the Alma. Raglan ordered 4 British divisions to attack. Conventional doctrine dictates a commander stays securely in the rear to direct such a massive assault. But instead of monitoring his formations, Raglan absent-mindedly trotted off on horseback. He took a bizarre route, crossing the river on the far right of the British line. He passed directly through lines of French skirmishers, light infantry sent ahead of the main force. They stood open-mouthed at the surreal sight of an old gentleman, followed by aides in cocked hats, riding blithely forward. He was wandering right through the middle of the battlefield, completely ignoring the active combat raging on all sides. Because Raglan wandered away to go on a stroll, he failed to impose himself on his subordinates. The British army was left fighting blind, operating without a commander at the exact height of their attack. Raglan continued his ride up the slope, entirely detached from the tactical reality unfolding in the valley below. He eventually reached the top of Telegraph Hill. His motivation for this perilous journey was simple. He wanted to pause and admire the view. This cross-section shows Telegraph Hill's extreme geographical advantage, a direct downward line of sight into the exposed rear of the Russian center. Raglan casually observed this scenic overlook would be an excellent place to sight guns for clear artillery fire. He ordered 2 heavy bronze cannon to be brought up the hill, and his staff officers personally fired them down into the valley. The shots were a direct hit. They blew up a Russian ammunition wagon squarely in the center of the battlefield. A gentle old man's desire for a scenic overlook had inadvertently bypassed all Russian defenses. By pure accident, he had achieved a perfectly executed artillery flanking maneuver. To understand the impact of this moment, we have to look at the Russian forces holding the center and how they reacted to the sudden explosion. The Russians applied strict military logic to what they were seeing. Experiencing artillery fire raining down from a high-ground position they thought was secure, they assumed they were witnessing a deliberate tactical maneuver. They immediately concluded that they had been outflanked and thoroughly outsmarted by the British commander. Panic set in. The Russians rapidly withdrew their batteries of guns, effectively abandoning their position and ceding the battle. The fog of war works both ways. The Russians lost the engagement because their strict adherence to military logic forced them to interpret an old man's absent-minded bumbling as a strategic masterstroke. The British victory at the Alma was a direct result of Raglan's failure to impose himself on his subordinates. By wandering off, he inadvertently created the conditions for success. This challenges the broader historical narrative, which so often attributes battlefield successes to the calculated willpower of great commanders. It leaves us with a difficult question. How much of recorded military history is actually decided by strategic brilliance, and how much is simply determined by random chance? The tidy, logical history books we read might just be neat narratives, imposed over the overconfident, absent-minded mistakes of old men.